Hey guys, I'm just gonna invite our special guest here in 1 second. Hey everyone. Sorry, we're a little bit delayed because we had an uncooperative little napper on the other end. I also have one who is not napping right now. Can you tell by her face? I'm even showing her face. Here we go.
Hi.
Hey, nice to see you.
Not only do I have an uncooperative napper, but I seem to also have uncooperative internet. So I'm doing this on my phone instead of on my Wi-Fi.
Yeah, me too. I'm having
Really?
a hard time with my internet too. Yeah, and I also have a baby that's not napping, so
Okay.
it's
Good
one of
day.
those days.
Yeah.
So I got quite a few questions, which you already know.
Yep.
And before we start, do you just want to talk briefly about what you do and
Yes.
yourself?
Perfect. Okay. So the thing with sleep consultants is generally speaking, there's only one way of doing things, which is sleep training. The certification that I took is very different. It's a completely different approach. It bases everything that I do on looking at a child's attachment needs before making any changes and looking at their developmental needs. So when I work with families, I do not use any kind of sleep training whatsoever, nothing extinction based at all. And in fact, I actually, nothing. I don't cry it out like, no, I don't do anything like that. Um, I do often work with families who have done sleep training and unsurprisingly it hasn't worked and they're looking for an
Right.
alternative. But I don't use those techniques at all when I work with my families. And so what I do is first I look at the big picture. So I have my clients fill out a very intense, comprehensive intake. And what I'm looking for is any red flags that would make me think there's things going on with sleep that aren't specifically related to things like schedules and wake windows. And
Right.
so we do is we look at the whole picture. We say, could there be a tongue tie? Is there a reflux issue? Could there be a dairy issue? Are there any muscular issues? What did the child's birth look like? For a lot of kids, if they came into the world in an unusual way, if forceps were used, if there was any kind of birth trauma or anything like that, that can also impact things like muscle tone and muscle tightness, and those can all impact sleep.
Right.
All of those things, we decide whether or not there's anything that's worth referring out to a specialist, and then we come back together and we look at just the sleep piece. And so when we work together, we look at oh my god, who is this? You are so hi. You're supposed to be napping.
Oh yes.
So we then look at the schedule, wake windows, and just general sleep totals. And I don't use things like sleep charts or anything like that because they really are very broad and they're not specific to each child's needs. And so I work with the families to basically co-create a plan that works for their child's needs, what's developmentally appropriate, and what works for their family.
Right.
And so that's, I think, the biggest piece is finding things that work for each family and coming up with plans that are tailored to that family's needs. And so family that says we're comfortable continuing to bed share, but this is what's not working, I say, okay, great, let's keep what you love and change what you don't. And that's where I base my plans on. I don't make changes or suggestions to problems that don't exist.
Yeah, and that's so important to kind of meet families where they're at. I think that's kind of a failure of the other ways is that it might work for you, but it might not because you have to totally change the way you do everything, and that's just not sustainable in a lot of people's lives.
Yeah. So the way that I came into this is that, so I have three kids. My oldest is just about to turn 6. And when she was 6 years old, She wasn't sleeping because most 6-month-olds don't really sleep that well. And we felt a lot of pressure to sleep train. And so we hired somebody who we said to them, we are not comfortable with cry it out. We want something more gentle. Like, let's see what we can do. And she said from the beginning, oh yeah, of course we can do something gentle. But I mean, the reality is that gentle sleep training is still sleep training. And we worked with her for quite a while. And it got to the point that the gentle method wasn't working because it was still extinction based. And she basically said to us, you either have to come to terms with the fact that you're never going to sleep again, or you have to just decide that you're going to do cry it out. Because if you're not going to do cry it out, I'm not going to work with you anymore. And so he said, okay, I guess we're not working together anymore. And we were like kind of resigned to never sleeping again. And then we found this other method, which is the one that I studied, that really looks at the child's attachment needs at the core of what you're doing in terms of sleep. And it literally changed everything about the way we parented. And we've been using that with all of our kids. And it's so important to use that piece to drive what you're doing, because if you're not fulfilling their attachment needs, they're not going to have the ability to separate from you at night.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a part I think people don't understand too. So it's important to talk about it so people understand how things like sleeping actually works. Like, that sounds so stupid, but people have a misunderstanding that babies can be trained to sleep, I think. And in some situations it works for people, very well, but it's not a one size fits all, which is why.
The thing is, like, sleep is a biological function and you can't control a biological function. And so there are things you can do to help. And the thing with sleep training is that it might work for some kids, but you have to look at what the cost to doing that is. If you're putting them in a position where they feel like mommy and daddy don't parent from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And if I need something, I'm on my own, there are repercussions down the road. I'll give you a really good example. So 2 or 3 ago, my 3-year-old woke up like screaming in the middle of the night. Had we sleep trained, we probably wouldn't have gone to him, because that's not what parents do when they sleep train their kids. And he was just crying. So we didn't know what was going on. Even though he has the words to tell us, he wasn't saying anything. He was just crying. And he was having a massive nosebleed. And so and it was like 5:30 in the morning. So like, had we sleep trained, we probably would have said, well, the sun isn't up on his clock yet, so we're just going to ignore him and just let him figure it out until the sun comes up. But he was like gushing blood and he wasn't saying anything. He was just crying. So like, that's a perfect example of why you want to have your kids know that you will respond when they need them. And you can still set boundaries that say, these are the reasons you should call. And then that if they're following those boundaries, that you're going to go to them when they need help. And so like for him, our boundaries are, you call mommy and daddy if you're not feeling well, if something is wrong, if you need to pee, or if there's one more now, I can't remember what it is, but they're all reasonable boundaries. If something's wrong, if you have a nightmare. So if you have a nightmare, if something's wrong, if you're not feeling well, or if you need to pee. I don't like going to him when he says, I lost my passy. That to me is a boundary that I put in place. Mm-hmm. He needs to know that if there's a problem, he can call.
Yeah, exactly. And it's even with little babies who can't tell you. I couldn't do cried out because I hated the idea of my baby crying and me just like ignoring it. I couldn't physically do it, but I also worry. Like, you worry, what if they need something and you're just ignoring it?
Right, exactly.
Be on the camera, like if you have a camera in the bedroom, like you can't always see what's going on. So
not see the blood on the camera.
Exactly. I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, we couldn't see it. So I think the thing with sleep training is, even if you're not doing full on cried out, if you're doing something that doesn't feel right to you, then that's considered sleep training to me. And if it doesn't feel right to you, then it's probably not right for your baby.
Yeah, and that's a good message for parents. If you don't have to fit into the sleep training mold. If it doesn't work for you, there's other options.
Other options, exactly. So that's what I'm here for, is to try and provide that other option for parents.
Well, perfect. So I got like a ton of, well, not a ton, but like enough questions.
Petra is watching and commenting as we're going. So Petra, if you have any questions, just throw them in there and we'll try and answer.
If anyone has questions, just throw them in as well.
Yeah.
One person asked, is 5 naps at 6 months too many? How do I extend wake times when he seems so tired all the time?
Okay, so the thing with the sleep industry in general is they say, at 6 months, you should be on X number of naps. The truth of the matter is that every child has different sleep needs and different sleep totals. And so On average, at 6 months, that's a lot of naps. But if she's finding that she can't extend his wake windows, then maybe that's the right schedule for him. But I would also want to look at what's going on at night and whether or not there's anything else that's impacting sleep. That's a little much. I mean, that's not to say that it's not okay. Like, it might be working really well for her and she just feels weird about it because everybody's saying, oh, he should be on 3 or 4 naps a day. But if it's working well and he's sleeping okay at night, I mean, for a 6-month-old, obviously you have to be realistic about expectations. But if everything else looks good and there's no nutritional issues and there's nothing else that could be impacting sleep and that schedule is working, nothing to fix. If there are other things going on, like his night sleep is really interrupted, or if he's, especially if he's breastfed, if he's doing, let's say, like short but very frequent feeds, that could also be a reason for him needing more naps and the naps being shorter. Right. And so that I would want to look at what his feeding schedule looks like and whether it makes sense to refer them out to an IBCLC.
Oh, we're cutting out. Hold on. You're out, yeah. Still out.
I'm back. Are you there?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what's going on with the internet today. So I was saying that a lot of the times there's a nutritional component to sleep too. And so if the nutritional piece needs to be looked at, I will refer out to an IBCLC who can look at it and say, you know, there's a chance there might be a tongue tie, or maybe we need to work on the latch, or there's lots of components for feeding that are then impacting sleep. And with 6 or 5 naps a day at 6 months, I would want to look at that piece before I say, don't worry about it. But in general, if everything else looks good, don't worry about what every other 6-month-old is doing. And as long as your child is happy and thriving, then it's probably okay.
Good to know. Because I think we're really stuck on, like, you need to be at 2 naps by this time or 3 naps. I'm like, for her personally, she changes, like she's trying to transition, I think, to 2 a day, but some days she still takes 3, some days she takes 4. It totally depends on the day, but she sleeps great at night, so I don't worry about it too much as long as, you know, she's happy and
exactly. It only needs to be fixed if it's a problem for you or if there's like a health component to it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So whoever asked that question, if you're concerned, reach out to me and we can do a whole thing where we look at every element of your child's life and look and see if there's anything else that might be impacting the reason for them having 5 naps at 6 months. But I'll go through all of that with you.
I'll get her to reach out. I don't know if she's on here. So the next question was, my baby wakes up whenever I lay her down. What can I do to improve this?
Okay, so that's like totally normal.
Yeah.
The answer varies based on the child's age. So if the child is an infant, unfortunately, that's something you, for a little bit, you kind of have to ride out because they need their parent close. Under 12 months of age, babies attach through the senses. So what that means is for them to feel safe, they need that proximity and they need to, you know, hear, see, smell, or touch their primary caregiver. So it's very, very common that when you go to lay the baby down, that they wake up. So one thing I would look at, and this is more of a mom trick than a sleep specialist trick, but I would look at the way in which you're physically putting the baby down. Sometimes like the way you're holding them can make it a bit of a smoother transition. So like one hand under the head and the other hand like over the body, under the bum, so that you can slide one hand out and then the other, rather than like just rolling them off both arms. That can sometimes help. If you're finding that the way you're issue, but what you could try is, if the baby's in a bassinet or crib, actually sleep on the bassinet or crib sheets for a couple nights so that the sheets have the mother's scent. And so that answers part of that need for proximity, because if it smells like the parent, then it might be easier to transition. But I would also want to know how old the baby is and where they're physically sleeping. Like, are they in a crib in their own room or are they still in the parent's room? And if they're under a year of age and she's really struggling, I would consider moving the crib or the bassinet into the parent's room. That's actually the recommendation from pediatricians, is to keep the baby in the 1 year of age. But the reason for that is because they do need that proximity. And like I found with my own kids, when I had the bassinet or the crib pulled up to the side of the crib, if they woke up, I could literally just like reach over, put on them, and it was enough to settle them. And I was able to have them sleep more independently in their own sleep space because I was close by.
Yeah, that is the recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it's echoed by the Canadian Pediatric Society as well. 1 year, at least 6 months though, is generally
Exactly.
Some babies do better in their own room though. I know from hearing from people, right? Like they like their own space, I guess.
100%.
Yeah. Next question. Are short naps normal for a baby aged 4 to 6 months, like 20 or 30 to 40 minutes or so?
Yes, very normal. The best indication of whether or not it's enough sleep is if your child's waking happy. So if that child is waking up and they're still cranky, they probably need more sleep for that nap. If they're waking and they're just like happy and ready to go, a short nap is really just inconvenient for parents, but there's nothing developmentally abnormal about it. Short naps at that age are very normal, and over time they do tend to lengthen on their own. But if they're waking unhappy, that's a different story, and then we sort of have to look at what we can do to sort of help keep them sleeping longer so that they're getting enough sleep to wake refreshed to make it through to the next nap.
Right. And how can I transition away from rocking my baby to sleep? That's a common question.
Common question. So usually what I suggest, first of all, there's nothing wrong with rocking to sleep if it's working for you. If it's no longer working, that's a completely different story. But you're not like doing anything bad by rocking your child to sleep. If it works, like by all means go for it. If that's something that if it works, great. If it works, but you don't want to do it anymore, that's okay too. And so what I usually recommend is basically adding layers to the child's sleep associations. So if your child is used to being rocked to sleep, you can try adding something in like singing at the same time, or a bum pad, because those are both things that you can do when you physically put them in the crib. And so if you add layers to their sleep associations, it'll be easier to sort of peel back those layers and remove one thing or two things slowly over time until you're at a point where you're getting closer to somewhat independent falling asleep. And so if you're rocking to sleep, one thing you can try is adding voice or adding a different kind of touch, or you can try just holding to sleep also. Sometimes that helps. And again, like if it's the kind of thing that it's, you're holding your child to sleep and it takes 10 minutes to get them to sleep, and you're okay doing that, I don't recommend changing it, because if it's working, like let's not upset something that isn't working, that is working. But if the parent is really just feeling like I can't do this anymore, it's too much on me physically, and like it's just not working for me anymore, even if it's working to get the child to sleep, the is to add those layers in so that you can slowly peel them back.
Yeah, and it's important to, like for your mental health, if it's not working for you, to make the change, and that's overlooked a lot by everyone.
Yeah.
But really like take a toll on your mental health if the sleep, whatever you're doing for sleep, isn't working for you, but even if it's working for baby.
And I think that's one of the sort of misconceptions about attachment parenting, is that if you are following any kind of attachment parenting, you have to sort of give up whatever makes you comfortable because it's all about your child. And it's not true. You can really work on making sure your child's attachment needs are being met, but still look after yourself. And the thing is, like, not looking after your own health and your mental health, and for a lot of people that sleep piece is a huge piece for them for the mental health part, you're not going to be in a place to be able to have patience to get them to sleep because you're struggling too much with the load of everything being on you. And so looking at that, self-care piece is so, so critical. And it's actually the place that I start with all of my clients. Like that, those are the first questions on my intake. What does self-care look like for you? How often are you doing it? What does your village of support look like to make sure that those parents are getting support, even if it's just from their partner, or even if it's from a grandparent for half an hour a week? You have to make sure that you are looking after your own needs in order to then look after your child's needs.
100%. Yeah, I know I struggle with that, even though I know like it's important. It's hard sometimes, right? And you have mom guilt or parent guilt, I guess, when you feel like you have to pass them off for a bit.
And I also, given like the climate of the world right now, it's actually worse than it usually is, because then you have the added component of like, is it safe for me to give them to somebody else? And so right now, I think the biggest thing that parents need to look at is if you can't get help from a village of support, like if it's just you or if it's just you and your partner, you have to look at ways of working that self-care piece in. And when it comes to sleep, a lot of the time, what I recommend to people, especially if the babies are younger, is do at least one nap a day as a motion nap so that you can get outside.
Yeah.
Because outside, first of all, it's great for your child, but getting outside makes a huge difference on your mental health. And that little thing that you can do, like it's not going to ruin your child forever if they have one nap a day in the carrier or the stroller. Like it's going to be good for you too. And you know, that has almost as big of an impact, if not bigger impact, than looking at sleep schedules and things like that.
Yeah, and exercise is good for your mental health too. Like even just walking is so good for your body and your mental health. So yeah. It's like a multiple benefit action. So
being outside is good for them too. Like getting that fresh air is really, really helpful.
Yeah, I found it really helpful, especially when she was like a newborn. We did a lot of walking just because the fresh air would put her to sleep. And when she wouldn't sleep, it was like so.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, how do I teach my baby how to fall asleep on their own? He self-soothes at night, but I can't put him down to sleep.
Okay, so the thing is that independence when it comes to sleep really is not something that can be taught. It comes over time when they're developmentally ready. And for a lot of parents, that's hard to hear because you just want to like teach them how to self-soothe. I mean, self-soothing, I think I did a post on it yesterday.
Yeah.
With this lovely explanation from Caitlin Klimmer, who's amazing. Self-soothing is really a myth. Like babies and children need their parents to help them co-regulate and to down-regulate. And so, you know, sleep training is what will tell you to teach them to sleep independently. I don't recommend it because they do need you there to co-regulate for them and to, you know, put them in a state where they're able to, you know, calm down. What you can work on is, again, adding those sleep association layers in and working on those in the crib. And so depending on the child's age, what I can sometimes recommend, especially if they're like in the, you know, 9 to 15 month range, it tends to work well, is you can support them to sleep while they're in your crib and you're beside them. So whether that's you lying beside the crib or if it's, you know, having your hand on them or singing or like, my favorite, I did this with my son, it was insane, but it worked really well, is I literally like had my nose up against the crib for a few nights. Feel like he was still beside me, but to teach him to go to sleep in his crib and that it was a safe space for him. And so anything that you can do to make their crib space feel safe and to reinforce that you are there for them. Those are things that you can do to help them sleep a little bit more independently, but keeping in mind what's developmentally appropriate. And depending on the age of the child that we're talking about, it might not be developmentally appropriate yet.
Yeah, and that's a common misconception is that, you know, babies after like 2 weeks of age should be able to do it, or like, you know, they're 4 months now, so they should be able to self-soothe, but it's like natural for a baby to want their parent to help them be comfortable. Like that's, like it's genetic, like it's so deeply ingrained in our body.
It actually, like, it makes me sad to think that parents think that like they have to like separate for their children for their children's own good. Like my sister actually had a baby last week, her first.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm aunt now. So she said last week, you know, like he gets really upset when I put him down. I said, so pick him up. And she was like, what? Isn't he going to get used to it? Like, isn't that going to create a problem for me later? And I was like, no, like that's the whole thing was he needs you. Like you're his mother and he needs you to hold him. And the truth is under 5 months of age, babies have an indiscriminate attachment. So anybody can hold a baby under 5 months of age and the baby will be happy with that.
Yes.
But that's what they need, that contact and closeness. They need somebody to be there for them. They're not ready to be alone. You know, in the same way that we say, you know, mothers in postpartum are in the 4th trimester, it's the same thing for a baby. Like it's a big shock to come into the world. They still need that support. And so, you know, sleep trainers who say, okay, they hit 4 months and they have no nutritional needs and now you can just leave them in a room alone. Like, you know, some kids it'll work, but there is a big price to pay for teaching them that they have to be on their own. And like the reason they stop eventually crying is because they physically, like their system basically shuts down because they can't physically handle the stress of crying anymore. And that's why they go to sleep. And over time, learn like, okay, I'm not going to cry anymore because it doesn't do me any good. But like, you're teaching them to know that they're basically on their own rather than teaching them that they have the support they need.
Yeah, which is kind of sad when you think about it that way, like the mechanism behind it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, next question. How do I get my baby to sleep past 1 in the morning?
Okay. So again, it depends on the baby's age. It might not be developmentally appropriate for that child to sleep through the nights. The thing with the 1 in the morning is that kids are in their deepest state of sleep basically until midnight. So it's really common to get that longer stretch of sleep until midnight or 1 a.m. and then have more frequently after that. So there's a few things that you can do. If the child still has nutritional needs, one thing that I often recommend is adding in a dream feed. And so if the baby is like frequently waking at the exact same time every night, go in, a half an hour before and do a dream feed. See if that extends that stretch for you. And for a lot of kids, that makes a huge difference. I just finished working with a family with a 15-month-old who, when we started working together, he was having like 5 to 6 wake ups a night. And we added in a dream feed, and some nights now he's up once, otherwise he sleeps through. So that dream feed can make a huge difference. And sometimes you can do 2 of them. Like when my son was a little bit younger, my youngest is 15 months. When he was younger, I was doing 2 dream feeds and I was waking up in the middle of the night. Like, it was a little crazy, but it was able to allow me to get that dream feed in before he was waking up and give me a longer stretch of sleep. So dream feed really good way to lengthen that. If you're 1 o'clock, it's obviously still dark, but if you're seeing wake ups more in the early morning hours, the best thing to do is to make sure the room is entirely dark, because babies work on circadian rhythm, and if the sun starts coming up, they're going to be up too.
Yeah, and blackout curtains are amazing.
Yeah.
And we like white noise a lot too in the environment. That really helps her make it through to like 7:30. She'll even sleep later. Like, she tries to sleep later.
You're lucky.
Yeah. Is there a good way to wean baby off of night feeds for formula or breast? The person who's asking is asking specifically about formula bottle fed baby though.
Okay, so it depends on the child's age. The thing with formula fed babies is they're able to go a little bit longer without eating than breastfed babies, so it's a little bit easier. You can try a dream bottle and see if that helps too. But the best thing to do is to consult with your pediatrician based on the child's age, because without knowing the child's age, I wouldn't recommend weaning at all until I can sort of look at the full picture. So consult with your pediatrician, and depending on their age also, I would look at their daytime feeds also and make sure that their nutritional needs are being met during the day, because a lot of the time what you see is if they're not getting enough during the day, or if they had just started solids and they're getting more solids than they are formula and breast milk, it actually creates more frequent wakes at night. So again, it's kind of like, it's hard to answer now without seeing the full picture, but those are some of the things that I would look at. Speak to the pediatrician, look at the daytime feeds, look at the solid intake, and then look at the child's age and see, what is reasonable to expect at that age.
Okay. And then, with breastfeeding, it's a little bit different because, they feed more frequently. It doesn't last as long in the GI system kind of thing. So same thing, I guess, would be to see the pediatrician.
I mean, the thing with pediatricians is they're not feeding experts. So sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, they've hit 6 months of age. So you can totally, it's not necessarily reasonable to expect that. And so that's when I would look at things like dream feed again, because they still might have nutritional needs, even though they don't have to eat, they still might eat. And so I would want to look at the whole schedule and see, like, first of all, are they getting enough daytime breastfeeds? Are they getting the appropriate amount of solids? And are they actually feeding at night, or are they just comfort sucking? And that's the other thing you can look at. You can do things like breaks. If you're nursing, I mean, you can do the same thing with a bottle actually too, but you can basically feed them and then take them off and then put them back on and see if you can sort of lengthen that period that you're taking them off for. Because if they're not necessarily eating the whole time, but they're just like comfort sucking, that's a good way to wean down the amount of time, and then slowly over time wean down the number of feeds.
Okay, that's a good recommendation. Second last question, any advice on how to transition baby to their own room, not using Cry It Out, which you don't?
I don't use Cry It Out. So again, it depends on the child's age. Under a year of age, I would recommend not doing it yet. Once they get to 1 year of age, the best thing to do is to spend a lot of daytime hours in the child's sleep space. Have them play games in their crib, do things like peekaboo, do things where you have them in their crib and you like go out of the room for like 3 seconds and then like pop back in happy and make a game out of it. And kind of time that they can spend in there to get them used to it. Anything you can do to add your scent to the space. So like I said before, sleeping on the crib sheets, adding a lovey in. With loveys, the best thing to do if you're breastfeeding is to like just spill a little bit of breast milk on the lovey so it smells like you. And if the child is older, we're talking like toddlers, and they've been co-sleeping, for example, which I wonder if that's what's going on with this family, and you're co-sleeping. It's not necessarily reasonable to take a 20 example or an 18-month-old who's been sleeping in the parent's bed and then throw them into a crib for the first time. So if that's what's going on, I usually recommend a floor bed. Because it's a sleep space they're going to be more used to, and it allows you to slowly transition them because you can spend a few nights there with them, and then slowly over time, sleep with them until they fall asleep and then sneak out, that kind of thing. But if they've ever slept in a crib before, depending on the age, sometimes a floor bed is a better way to go.
Good to know. And that's just like in their room, I guess.
You just make sure that there's like absolutely nothing dangerous in the room. So any furniture that's in the room is tethered to the wall. There's no like lamp cords or monitor cords or any cords dangling. Electrical outlets are closed. If there's a staircase nearby, the staircase is gated, things like that. So make sure the sleep space is entirely safe. If there's a bathroom, put a lock on the toilet, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then get, like a double mattress, for example, and you put it right on the floor so that even if they roll out of bed, they're rolling like 6 inches on the floor. But they're going to be more used to, because if they're used to sleeping in a bed, it's such a wide open space that to then throw them into a crib, it's unlikely to work well. And again, the benefit is that you can be there with them to help them fall asleep and slowly over time wean that down. So, the first 2 nights or 3 nights, for example, you could spend the whole night in there with them. Mm-hmm. And then the 2 nights you could let them fall asleep and then sneak out and then come back if they wake up, that kind of thing. So depending on the age, sometimes that's a better way to go.
That's just like a slow transition method, kind of like you've recommended for other.
Exactly.
And you talked about loveys. So the last question is recommendations about adding comfort items into cribs. What age is that like appropriate or safe, I guess?
Well, the recommendations is to have nothing in the crib until 1 year of age. But you also have to use your judgment. So if you're putting your child in their crib in their own space at, let's say, 8 months, and they are rolling and they're able to lift their head up, my own kids, I've given them a very small lovey under 1 year of age, but safe sleep recommendations say nothing in the crib. But the loveys that I've given my kids are like one that's like basically like 6 to 8 inches long. It's not something that could be on top of their face.
Yeah, or that they couldn't remove easily.
Exactly. So it's something that can't in any way suffocate them. Like I don't really like the loveys that are like a blanket with a head attached to them.
Yeah,
because so those have the potential to be dangerous in a crib with a young baby. But the ones that are like a very, very small doll, like the ones that are really good that I use with my kids, there's a line called Carole, and they have baby Caroles. They're not so cheap. I think they're like $35 each, but they're very, very small and they're soft. And so like there's no way that they could suffocate a baby. And so those ones I'm okay with a little bit younger. But again, the safe sleep recommendations is nothing until 1 year of age.
Okay, that's good, because my child is actually over 1, so she can use
over 1. I would use a lovey.
Is there a recommendation at 1, like in regards to like obviously like a blanket, for example? Can they safely have a blanket at that point, or is it still like?
I don't usually recommend it. Again, like I think that it was very easy for a child to pull a blanket over their heads. I'm a big fan of sleep sacks. The other benefit of getting them used to sleep sacks younger is they can't lift their legs when they're wearing sleep sacks. And so sometimes helps mitigate, kids are a little anxious getting to the point where they try to climb out of their cribs, because if they're used to being in a sack, they can't lift their leg to get over the rail. So it's a safety thing, and it's a safety thing. Like there are benefits to putting them in a sleep sack. The only downside to a sleep sack where you have to really keep an eye on things is that they don't have the ability to remove it. You have to make sure that you're using appropriate for the temperature of the room. So
right.
The lighter the better, because it's easier to go in and help them if they're cold, but if they're too warm, you might not know about it.
Yeah.
So I usually recommend using a lighter sleep sack. I see there's a question here. Crib. So it depends how old your child is. If 15 months, so my son's also 15 months old and we co-sleep some of the time. I personally wouldn't trust him on a floor bed because he's like kind of a crazy kid and he's out of that floor bed in 5 seconds. So I have him in a crib. But that, and so he only spends part of the night in his crib. He usually does like 7 to midnight or 1 o'clock, and then he's back in our bed. So that's another thing you can try, is because they sleep deeper in the first part of the night, you're likely to get a longer stretch until about midnight, and then you can basically have them in their crib till midnight, get your evening back, be able to get yourself. Oh, Petra's also 15 months old, so we all have something in common. But doing that and getting them into the crib in the first stretch of the night will allow you to sort of get your time back, and then just bring them into bed in the middle of the night if you're still comfortable doing that. But at 15 months, you can try a floor bed. It just depends on your child's temperament. With my son, there is no way it would work. Yeah, first part in his crib, and then listen, like, I don't like solving problems that don't exist. If that's working for you, I would continue doing it until it no longer works for you.
Yeah, and that's generally like a recommendation for most things with sleep, is if it's working and you're okay with it, keep going.
Yeah. Listen, there are sleep trainers who would say, like, you're insane to have your 15-month-old still sleeping in your bed. Like, what, you're ruining your child. Like, it's going to be a disaster. But, there's no reason to change something that is working for your family, and every family is different. And, like my son who's still sleeping with us part of the night, he's my third. And so, like, I don't have the energy to spend, sitting beside his crib at 3 a.m. It's easier to just bring him to our bed, and everybody gets more sleep that way. And that's the goal. Like, teaching him independent sleep is not my priority at 15 months. That'll come with age. My priority is making sure that he's well rested so that he can do the things he needs to do during the day that are developmentally appropriate for him.
And that you're well rested so you can take care of him properly. Because, yeah, like, I know in the early days, my midwives even said, like, sometimes you need to sleep and baby needs to sleep. And that's like the best, whatever works for that is the best option, because you can't parent properly if you don't sleep at all.
No, and you know what? There's a great book that I recommend to some of my families who are bed sharing. It's called Safe Infant Sleep by Dr. James McKenna. And he talks a lot about, the fact that in the absence of any risk factors, there are lots of benefits to co-sleeping. If there are risk factors, obviously it's not safe, but if you've eliminated those risk factors, then, there are studies that show that especially for breastfeeding mothers, he calls it breast sleeping, because there are significant benefits to things like regulating a baby's breathing, milk supply, obviously a mother's sleep. All of those things can be done very, very well while bed sharing. And there are studies that show that there is actually a reduction in the risk of SIDS with breastfeeding mothers who are safely co-sleeping, because the mother and baby's breathing gets regulated with each other. And so a mother will wake up if there's a pause in breathing. And there have been that show that, like, there is a reduction in apneas with breast sleeping mothers. So again, like, there are sleep consultants who look at me and are like, you're crazy, and you're doing something horrible to tell your clients that they can bed share. But if it's done safely and it works for you, then do what works. Like, people have been bed sharing for thousands of years. There's a reason it's done. It works. And so I don't usually recommend to parents to start bed sharing if they haven't been, but if you are already bed sharing and it's working for you, and then there's elements that aren't working, let's work on the elements that aren't working and leave the elements that are.
Yeah, and there are safe sleep guidelines. In the US, there's Safe Sleep 7, which has like recommendations, and they're all based on studies. And that is also, I don't know about like the rest of Ontario, but in Peel, that's actually been incorporated into their like prenatal classes now.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Talk about it, which is good, because I think the fact that it was just like no before made it more dangerous, because people don't know how to do it safely.
So again, there's all these studies. The reasons that the recommendation is not to do it at all is because in communities where the mothers have less support, it tends to be in more ethnic communities, actually, and there's studies on this.
Yeah.
The less support, they don't have necessarily a regular partner, so there might be a different person sharing that bed throughout the child's first year of life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where one of the risks comes from, is that if you have a non-parent sharing the bed, for example, they are less likely to be aware of the child being there, and that's where, for example, a suffocation risk might come from. Or if a really common one is if you have a headboard and the mattress isn't secure against the headboard,
yes,
can get wedged there. And so if you eliminate all of those risks, there are benefits to bed sharing. And the fact that there's been more conversation around how to do it safely is immensely helpful, because it also takes the guilt away from parents who feel like they don't have any other choice because their child is just not sleeping. And so when I work with clients, that those two recommendations, metrics and the one for the Safe Sleep 7, are both in my terms and conditions that I have parents sign off on. So I know that they've read it and they understand what's safe and what's not, and that it's okay if they want to continue doing it.
Yeah, and that is like so important to me, because like I obviously want to do the safest thing, and that's what I recommend as well. But you also, and this is what we talked about at the beginning, you have to meet parents where they are. And also another thing to consider is that it is cultural a lot of the time to co-sleep. And by no, don't do it, you're not being culturally, like, you're not respecting culture, you're not adapting to it, you're not working with that client properly. So
yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, so a lot of work to be done overall, like to fix the way that it's dealt with.
Yeah.
There are safe ways to do it. It's obviously something you would discuss with your provider too, because for example, premature babies is a big no-no. Under 3 months old, big no-no. Underweight babies, things like that. There's so many different criteria.
Right. If the parent is a smoker, if one of the parents is obese, those are all risk factors.
Yeah. So being aware
factors first, and then look at whether or not it's the right fit for your family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All the questions that I have.
Amazing. If anybody else has any questions, you're more than welcome to follow me on Instagram. My handle is @officialsleepingbeauties. And if you have any specific questions about your child or your family situation, book a 15-minute free discovery call with me, and we can look at which one of my support packages makes the most sense for you. I'm also always open to customizing a package depending on a family's needs. And then I also offer an e-course where I talk about sort of like the big things that I cover with my families. It's obviously not specific because it sort of covers everything in a broad way. But if you're just looking to get a little bit more information about how to set your child up for sleep, without the use of sleep training, that's helpful. But obviously the comprehensive package is probably the best way to go, because we spend basically 5 weeks together going over everything, and I teach you how to get to a point where not only can we help fix some of the sleep issues, but I'm giving you skills that you can use when you hit, let's say, the 18-month progression 3 months down the road, and you don't have to worry about coming back because you'll have the skills to use.
Which is great, because I know a lot of the like sleep consultants don't offer that. Like, it's like you have to come back when they're between this age and pay me more money, and like it's not as.
I do have a package where it's like a sleep retainer, where you, like, if you've purchased a previous package and you feel like you need support long term, it's like a flat rate, and I'll help you like until your kid is 4. But the truth of the matter is that I want to set parents up so that they don't need to ask me those questions afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
They have the skills they need to be confident in following their instincts. And that's, I think, the most important thing, is you just have to trust your gut, and sometimes you need somebody to look at it from the outside and say, okay, this is what I think is going on. But so much of this is just trusting who you are as a parent and what your child's needs are, and knowing that you have the skills to do it yourself.
Exactly. And that's super important.
You just followed the whole conversation.
What?
Is she sleeping?
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah. And she's still sleeping and I'm talking, so that's great.
Fantastic.
So everything you've said is great, and I like that you the way that you approach sleep. It's much safer and more developmentally appropriate than a lot of the consultants that I've seen online anyway.
Yeah, it drives me nuts that people, say you should do things, this way or that way. And parents just feel this enormous guilt that they're just not doing things right because they're not doing what a specialist is telling them to do. So I'm here to tell you that, like, my way is to sort of help you follow your gut, and whatever works for your family is fine. And we'll fix the things that are not working, but I'm not going to tell you to change things that are working.
And that's amazing. That's such a comfort, because we already have so much things to feel guilty about that we shouldn't, but as parents, nice to know that, someone needs help, they can seek it without like hardcore judgment.
No judgment here. I was just talking to another mom. She actually did a whole Instagram thing on this. She's very funny. She's a single mom by choice. and she has, I think he's almost 3, and she's still co-sleeping with him, and he's like sleeps like a teenager. Like he wakes up at 11 o'clock in the morning and goes to bed at 11 o'clock at night. And she's been worrying about it, but she's been very hesitant to reach out to somebody because she was like, people look at me like I'm crazy and tell me I should have my kid taken away from me. Like I need somebody who's not going to judge me. And I was like, listen, like if that schedule works for you, then there's nothing to change. The only time you're going to need to change that is when it stops working. And because he's 3, like let's talk in 6 months when you need to start getting him set up to go back to school in kindergarten.
Yeah,
but like if that works for you, especially as a single parent, where like that way you can get up at 7 a.m. and get 5 hours worth of work done before your kid even wakes up. Like it's amazing that you were able to get him on that schedule. So this is a very judgment-free zone. Like I work with each family's needs, and I will never say to a family, well, you know, everybody else does it this way, so you should too. It's very much about what works for you, what makes sense for you as a parent, what fits your parenting style. And I think the most important piece is what your child's temperament is. And that is a huge thing you have to take into account when coming up with anything having to do with changes or sleep in general. Because if your child is, let's say, highly sensitive, they're not going to react the way that, you know, run-of-the-mill kids will when it comes to sleep. And we have to come up with a plan that makes sense for your child's needs. And every child is different. Even if you have 3, they all have different needs.
And they're so different, even like within a family unit. Like I have one, but when I talk to parents and families, that's what everyone tells me. So
like it's as if they came from different families. Like my kids they're nothing alike at all in every aspect of their lives. So, you know, like that's also something important to look at, is like, what is this individual's child's temperament like?
Yeah, and that there's no plan that's going to be able to work for every child, and you kind of have to try different things.
And a lot of it is trial and error. Like that's why I spend 5 weeks with parents when I do my comprehensive plan, because a lot of it is like, let's try these 3 things, and if they're not working, let's try again. Like we don't have to stick to them if they're not working, and it's not your fault if they're not working.
No.
We just have to step back and look again and say, what can we do to change it to make things work for your family?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking. We should do this again, because I get a lot of questions about sleep through my blog. So
happy to do it anytime.
Perfect. Yeah, so you provided your information, but if you want to just say it again, just for a couple people join words.
So my Twitter handle is @officialsleepingbeauties, and my website is sleepingbeauties.ca. And I think, did we talk about a coupon code?
No.
Okay. So I'm happy to offer a coupon code to anybody who's watching. So I haven't set it up yet, so give me like a half an hour to get it set up before you go book me on my website. But let's do the coupon code as Kate on the blog, so one word, and we'll do 10% off any sleep package.
Perfect.
Okay, so if you're thinking about it and you're not sure and the cost is prohibitive, let's do 10% off, and let's get you some sleep.
Yay, we love sleep.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone who's watching and listening. I hope you learned something. And if you didn't, I hope that you contact Official Sleeping Beauties and get some help, as sleep is important.
Yes, I agree. Okay. By your next time.